Carl Jung's most dangerous discovery wasn't about madness or schizophrenia or any clinical illness you'd expect a psychiatrist to obsess over. No, his most dangerous discovery was about a certain kind of person, a rare type who could see what others miss, who could detect the invisible threads beneath every conversation, every mask, every social game. People who could read a room with terrifying clarity, pierce through the facades of politeness, and sense what no one dared admit out loud. It sounds like a gift, almost supernatural. But Jung warned, it wasn't. For those who lived with it, this perception often became a curse. They ended up isolated, drained, alienated from normal life. Not because they were crazy or broken, but because the human psyche wasn't built to bear that much truth all at once. Today, we're diving into Jung's most dangerous discovery: why the ability to see everything can destroy you or transform you into something extraordinary. Chapter 1. The Case That Changed Jung. The story begins in 1913, one of the darkest years in Jung's life. He had just severed ties with Freud, the man who had been his mentor and intellectual anchor. Without Freud's shadow to stand in, Jung entered what he later called his confrontation with the unconscious. He was haunted by visions, plagued by dreams so vivid they bordered on hallucination, and uncertain whether he was descending into psychosis or stepping into a new kind of knowledge. It was during this fragile time that Jung encountered a patient who would leave a lasting mark on his work. She was not an ordinary patient, not hysterical, not delusional, not psychotic. Instead, she possessed what Jung described as a rare and dangerous form of perception. She could walk into a room and instantly know who was lying. She could sense hidden resentments between friends. She picked up the grief behind a forced smile, or the silent rivalry between two colleagues, as if she had X-ray vision for the soul. Jung wrote in his private notes, "The patient shows an extraordinary ability to perceive unconscious contents in others, yet this ability brings her great distress, not advantage. Small talk was impossible for her because she saw through it. Friendships rarely lasted because people felt unnervingly exposed around her. Workplaces rejected her, not for incompetence, but because her very presence destabilized the unspoken rules that kept groups functioning." For Jung, this case revealed something profound. He wasn't treating a disease. He was witnessing what happens when perception becomes too sharp, when the unconscious of others bleeds into your awareness, when the psyche becomes so differentiated that normal social life collapses around it. This wasn't delusion. It wasn't paranoia. When Jung cross-checked her impressions, he found them startlingly accurate. She described the private motives, fears, and conflicts of those around her, and Jung verified them through subtle questioning. What he realized was chilling. Sometimes the unconscious can become too conscious, and when that happens, reality itself becomes unbearable. Chapter 2. When perception becomes dangerous. Jung kept circling back to this patient in his notes, not because she fit a diagnosis, but because she didn't. She wasn't psychotic. She wasn't hallucinating. She was accurate. And that was the problem. She could feel tensions before they exploded. She could name motives people hadn't admitted even to themselves. But instead of being rewarded for this uncanny sensitivity, she was punished. People avoided her. Groups expelled her. Her relationships dissolved. Why? Because Jung realized that perception this sharp comes with an invisible cost. When you see too much of the unconscious, the raw, hidden material everyone else is busy repressing, you destabilize the fragile illusions society depends on. Jung would later call this participation mystique, a state where your psychic boundaries blur and you start absorbing not just people's words and actions, but their unspoken fears, secret desires, even their shadows. Imagine walking through life as a psychic sponge, constantly soaking up what everyone else is trying to bury. It's not hard to see why that would crush someone. The human mind isn't built to carry the unresolved traumas of every stranger in the room. And yet, for a small percentage of people, this is daily reality. Jung recognized the danger. This wasn't pathology in the traditional sense. It was a perception that was too real, a kind of awareness that stripped away the protective veil most people rely on to function. He wrote in one of his Red Book entries, "There are those whose psychic apparatus is so finely tuned that they do not merely hear what is said, but what is unsaid. They breathe in the very atmosphere of the unconscious." It sounds mystical, even poetic, but for those who live with it, it can be hell. Because when you see too much, you don't just notice beauty. You notice the ugliness no one else wants to admit exists. You notice the bitterness behind forced smiles, the lies that hold families together, the hidden resentments that glue institutions in place. And once you see them, you can't unsee them. For Jung, the danger wasn't simply the perception itself, it was the isolation it created. The clearer your vision of the unconscious, the harder it became to stay connected to the collective world of normal people. Chapter 3. The Rare Personality Type. Decades later, Jung would build an entire framework around personality typology, and buried within it was the key to understanding this strange patient. He called her an introverted intuitive type. If you're familiar with the MBTI, the Myers-Briggs system that grew from Jung's work, this would be the INFJ or INTJ archetype. But Jung wasn't talking about personality quizzes. He was describing something far deeper, the way consciousness organizes reality. For most people, perception is filtered through sensation, what you can see, hear, touch. For others, it's filtered through thinking or feeling, logic, ethics, values. But for the rare introverted intuitive, perception comes through the unconscious. They don't just see what is, they see what could be. They pick up on hidden patterns, psychological undercurrents, future outcomes implied by the present. And they pay a steep price for it. Jung estimated this type makes up maybe 1% of the population. Modern research backs this up indirectly. Psychologist Dr. Elaine Aron, for example, found that about 20% of people are highly sensitive, more responsive to subtle cues, more reactive to emotional and sensory input. But the group Jung singled out was even rarer. Those whose perception isn't just sensitive, but intuitive in a differentiated way. That word, differentiated, is crucial. It means their intuition isn't vague or fuzzy. It's precise, surgical. They can describe unconscious motives with uncanny clarity, as if they're reading the hidden script of reality. Jung wrote, "These persons do not merely feel more. They perceive that which has not yet reached consciousness in others. They are seers, though often against their will. This makes them invaluable, prophets in a world that prefers comfortable lies. But it also makes them vulnerable, because society doesn't reward people for pointing out its shadows. More often, it punishes them." Chapter 4. The Four Faces of the Intuitive Seer. Jung noticed early on that not every intuitive function expressed itself in the same way. Some people carried their intuition in their emotions, others in their logic, others in their physical sensations. And then there were those whose intuition was raw and overwhelming, like staring at the sun, without sunglasses. To make sense of this, Jung began categorizing what he saw. Over time, 4 distinct variations of this rare perceptive type emerged. Each one carried its own gift and its own danger. Type 1, the feeling intuitive. These are the empaths turned up to 11. For them, intuition isn't just an idea or a hunch, it's embodied as emotion. They walk into a room and instantly feel the collective mood as if it were their own. If someone is grieving, they'll feel that grief wash over them like a tide. If someone is angry but hiding it, the intuitive feeling type will feel their own chest tighten, their stomach churn, as though the anger were theirs. Jung noted that these individuals often can't tell where their emotions end and others' emotions begin. He described them as living in a state of perpetual contagion, constantly catching the unspoken feelings of their environment. The gift is that they can comfort, empathize, and connect at levels most people can't imagine. The curse is that they drown in it. Without strong boundaries, they become emotional chameleons, losing their own sense of self in the ocean of everyone else's pain. Type 2, the thinking intuitive. This type doesn't just feel, they know. Their intuition fuses with the thinking function, which makes their insights razor sharp. They see patterns unfold like chess games, predicting moves long before they happen. Jung observed these patients forecasting relationship breakdowns, career failures, and even psychological collapses months before they occurred, not through logic, but through an unconscious grasp of the inevitable. It can feel prophetic. Friends may joke that they're psychic, but what's really happening is unconscious pattern recognition at an advanced level. The problem? People rarely thank you for predicting their downfall. If you warn someone their marriage is heading for disaster, they'll likely resent you. If you point out the flaw in someone's grand career plan, you'll become the enemy. The thinking intuitive often ends up burdened with foresight they can't share, or worse, punished for daring to speak it aloud. Type 3, the sensation intuitive. This is where intuition manifests physically. These individuals don't just sense the psyche, they sense the body as well. They notice the slump in someone's shoulders that signals depression, the subtle tightening around the eyes that reveals hidden fatigue, the cough that foreshadows illness long before it's acknowledged. Jung reported cases where sensation intuitives picked up on medical conditions before any doctor diagnosed them. In a way, they are walking diagnostic instruments, attuned to the psychosomatic language of the body. But the cost is heavy. Imagine constantly noticing not only your own aches and pains, but the unspoken bodily distress of everyone you meet. It's overwhelming, and it can lead them to feel perpetually anxious, like they're surrounded by invisible illness and decay. Type 4, the pure intuitive. Finally, there's the rarest and often the most tormented version, the pure intuitive. This type doesn't anchor their perception in thinking, feeling, or sensation. Instead, their intuition is raw, unfiltered, and boundless. They see everything, they sense everything, but they lack the structures to organize or express it coherently. Jung described these individuals as living in a state of perpetual overwhelm. They're flooded with unconscious material, but can't channel it into language or logic. Their visions may come as dreams, symbols, or inexplicable impressions that they struggle to communicate without sounding incoherent. They are the mystics, the visionaries, sometimes even the mad prophets. Their gift is enormous, but so is their risk of being crushed by the sheer weight of it all. Jung emphasized that each of these 4 types requires a different path of survival. A feeling intuitive must learn boundaries. A thinking intuitive must learn compassion. A sensation intuitive must learn grounding. And a pure intuitive must learn translation, turning their flood of impressions into art, symbols, or language that others can actually digest. But no matter the subtype, the same truth applies. This gift can either transform you into a healer or destroy you from within. Chapter 5. The Three Great Dangers. Jung often said that the psyche protects itself with illusions. We don't see reality as it is. We see it through the filters that keep us sane and social. Strip away those filters, and you don't become enlightened. You become vulnerable. For people with differentiated perception, those rare individuals who see through masks, lies, and unconscious patterns, Jung identified three primary dangers. Each one is destructive on its own. Combined, they can ruin a life. Danger 1. Disrupting the collective illusion. Every group, families, workplaces, even whole societies, survives on shared illusions. These are the unspoken agreements about what we will and will not acknowledge. We agree not to mention the uncle's drinking problem at Thanksgiving. We agree not to question the boss's fragile ego at the office. We agree not to talk about the corruption at the foundation of the political system. These illusions keep groups functioning, even if they're built on denial. But the highly perceptive individual can't help but puncture them. They see the lies. They feel the repressed anger simmering beneath polite words. They sense the shadow everyone else is working overtime to ignore. To the group, this person becomes radioactive. Just their presence threatens the collective spell. Sooner or later, they'll be pushed out, not for what they do, but for what they reveal by existing. Jung wrote, "The one who perceives too clearly becomes a danger to the group, for they cannot help but tear at the fabric of its illusions." This is the first danger. The truth teller is cast out, not because they're wrong, but because they're intolerably right. Danger 2. Psychological isolation. The second danger is subtler, but no less destructive. When your perception goes beyond the norm, you stop speaking the same language as everyone else. You notice what others miss, and it makes you feel like you're living in a parallel world. Friends talk about surface-level drama, but you can see the hidden motives driving it. Co-workers gossip about office politics, but you can map out the unconscious power struggles underneath. Even in your closest relationships, you often feel like you're not being heard because you're speaking from a depth others can't even recognize. Jung called this the problem of the superior function. Your greatest strength becomes your greatest curse because it separates you from the collective. He wrote, "The curse of consciousness is that it cannot be shared with those who do not possess it." The individual becomes an island of awareness in an ocean of unconsciousness. This is why so many perceptive individuals report a kind of existential loneliness, a sense that they're not just alone in a room, but alone in reality itself. Danger 3. Dissolution of identity. The third danger is the most terrifying: loss of self. When you constantly absorb the unconscious contents of others, it becomes hard to tell where you end and the world begins. Their emotions flood into you. Their shadows infect your psyche. Their unresolved conflicts become your inner noise. Jung called this participation mystique a state where the boundary between self and other dissolves, and the individual becomes merged with the collective unconscious. At first, it may look like empathy, but in its extreme form, it becomes annihilation. You stop being yourself. You become a mirror of everyone else's pain and darkness until your own identity evaporates. Jung warned, The danger is not only exile from society, but annihilation of the individual. To absorb too much of the collective is to lose oneself entirely. This, above all, is why Jung considered this discovery dangerous. It's not just about being misunderstood. It's about the very real possibility of being swallowed whole by what you perceive. So, the dangers are clear. 1. You threaten the illusions that keep groups together. 2. You become an isolated island of awareness. 3. You risk dissolving your own identity under the weight of others' unconscious material. But Jung didn't stop there. He didn't believe this condition was hopeless. He believed there was a way through, a path that could transform the curse into a gift. And that path was what he called individuation. Chapter 6. Jung's Path of Survival. Jung was never content just pointing out the problem. He wanted a roadmap for transformation. And for those cursed or blessed with differentiated perception, his solution was what he called the individuation process. At its core, individuation means becoming fully yourself, not swallowed by the unconscious, not trapped in the collective, but standing as a whole, integrated individual. For Jung, this wasn't a luxury. For people who perceive too much, it was a matter of survival. Step 1. Recognition and differentiation. The first step is recognizing what's happening. Most people with heightened perception think they're crazy. They see patterns no one else acknowledges. They sense emotions others deny. They're told they're too sensitive, paranoid, or reading too much into things. Jung flips the script. You're not broken, you're differentiated. But survival requires differentiation. You must constantly ask, what's mine? What's not mine? That anxiety you just felt, is it yours, or did you absorb it from the person sitting across the room? That anger in your chest, does it belong to you, or to your father's unresolved trauma? This process of separation is exhausting, but it's the first wall between you and annihilation. Step 2. Shadow integration. Next comes the shadow, all the repressed, denied, and unwanted aspects of yourself. Here's the paradox. The more perceptive you are of others, the more vulnerable you are to being consumed by their darkness. The only defense is to face your own. If you refuse your shadow, you'll be overwhelmed by everyone else's. But if you integrate it, if you look it in the eye and make peace with it, you become grounded. You stop being an open wound. Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. For the seer, shadow work isn't optional, it's armor. Step 3. Conscious participation. The third step is choosing how to engage with the collective. You can't opt out of society completely, nor can you let yourself be swallowed by it. The only path is conscious participation. That means you step into groups, knowing exactly what illusions they're built on, and you play along just enough to survive. You don't have to destroy every mask. You don't have to expose every lie. You learn discernment, when to speak, and when silence is wiser. Think of it as a dance. 1 foot in the collective, 1 foot outside it. Always anchored in your individuality, but still connected enough to the world to avoid total exile. Step 4. Creative expression for Jung. Survival also demanded creativity. The unconscious speaks in symbols, and without an outlet, it floods you. That's why Jung painted, carved, built his infamous Red Book. He didn't do it for art's sake. He did it to keep his psyche intact. If you're one of these rare people, creative expression isn't a hobby, it's a lifeline. Writing, painting, music, film, Whatever allows you to give form to the chaos, you need it. Jung believed art is how the psyche metabolizes what would otherwise destroy it. Step 5. Wholeness over normalcy. Finally, Jung insisted that the goal isn't to be normal. Normal people don't perceive what you perceive. Your task isn't to fit into their world. It's to become whole in yours. That means embracing the gift, along with its curse. It means accepting isolation, but also building relationships with the few who can meet you at your depth. It means refusing to numb yourself into unconsciousness just to be accepted. Jung's words, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." For the perceptive few, survival means exactly that, becoming whole, no matter how dangerous it feels. So now we have the path: recognition and differentiation, shadow integration, conscious participation, creative expression, wholeness over normalcy. But Jung knew these weren't just abstract steps. History gave us vivid examples. People who either made it through the fire or were destroyed by it. Chapter 7. Warnings from history. History is full of people who saw too much, individuals cursed with perception beyond the ordinary. Their lives became cautionary tales for Jung, proof that this rare gift can either elevate or destroy. Here are 3 of the most striking examples: Nietzsche, Meister Eckhart, and Jung himself. Nietzsche, collapse into madness. Friedrich Nietzsche was one of the sharpest minds of the 19th century. His philosophy cut through the illusions of morality, religion, and culture. He declared that God is dead, not as a celebration, but as a diagnosis. Society's illusions were crumbling, and humanity wasn't ready for the truth. Nietzsche saw too clearly. He looked into what Jung later called the abyss of meaninglessness, and it consumed him. By 1889, Nietzsche collapsed in Turin, Italy. He embraced a horse being beaten in the street, broke down in tears, and never recovered. The last decade of his life was spent in insanity, cared for like a child, his genius gone. For Jung, Nietzsche was a warning. If you confront too much of the unconscious without integration, it shatters you. Nietzsche's perception was unmatched, but his psyche wasn't strong enough to contain it. Meister Eckhart, the mystic who survived, contrast. Nietzsche with Meister Eckhart, the 13th century Christian mystic. Eckhart also perceived realities most couldn't fathom. He preached about the ground of the soul, a place beyond images and concepts, where the self and God were one. These were ideas centuries ahead of their time, bordering on heresy. But unlike Nietzsche, Eckhart didn't collapse. He integrated his vision through spiritual practice. Prayer, discipline, symbolic language, these gave structure to his experiences. He didn't drown in the collective unconscious. He channeled it. Though the church tried him for heresy, Eckhart died at peace, leaving behind teachings that still inspire seekers today. For Jung, Eckhart was proof that survival is possible when you have a container for your perception, a symbolic or spiritual framework strong enough to hold the immensity of what you see. Jung, the man who faced the depths. And then there was Jung himself. From 1913 to 1917, Jung went through what he called his confrontation with the unconscious. It began with terrifying visions, rivers of blood flooding Europe, corpses piling high, apocalyptic imagery years before World War I broke out. For a time, Jung feared he was going insane, like Nietzsche, but instead of collapsing, he turned to creative expression. He drew, painted, and wrote obsessively in what became the Red Book, a massive illuminated manuscript of his inner journey. It was through this process that Jung survived. He later admitted that everything of value in his work, archetypes, the collective unconscious, individuation, came out of that dangerous confrontation. Jung himself became living proof of his own theory. Perception without integration destroys, but perception with integration transforms. The lesson of the warnings. Nietzsche shows us the danger of raw perception without structure. Eckhart shows us the safety of spiritual frameworks, and Jung shows us the power of creative integration. 3 men, 3 outcomes: destruction, transcendence, transformation. For anyone cursed with this rare perception, these lives are maps. They remind us that the danger is real, but so is the possibility of survival, even greatness. Next, we'll explore what Jung called the rare few who understand, the only people who can truly walk alongside someone carrying this gift. Chapter 8. The few who understand. Jung knew that most people live behind walls of illusion, and for the highly perceptive, that means most relationships feel hollow. You see beneath the mask, but they can't see beneath yours. But Jung also believed there are a few, very few, who can meet you on the battlefield of awareness. These are the people who keep the seer from total isolation. The individuated soul. The first group are those who've walked the same path of individuation. They've faced their own shadows. They've confronted their illusions. They know what it means to be stripped of comforting lies. When you meet someone like this, the connection is instant. There's no small talk, no masks. It's depth, speaking to depth. Jung described it as 2 souls recognizing one another outside the collective. This is rare, maybe once or twice in a lifetime, but when it happens, it's a lifeline. The fellow traveler. Then, there are those in the process of becoming. They may not be as far along, but they're seekers. They ask the forbidden questions. They hunger for truth, even if it burns. Being around them feels different from being around the unconscious masses. You see in them the spark of awareness, the willingness to wake up. They may not fully understand your depth yet, but their openness creates resonance. Together, you can walk part of the path. The witness. Finally, Jung spoke of the importance of the witness. This person doesn't necessarily share your perception. They may not see the unconscious currents like you do, but they believe you. They hold space for you. The witness is the one who doesn't tell you you're crazy or too sensitive or imagining things. They accept that your perception is real, even if it's not theirs. Sometimes this is a therapist. Sometimes it's a friend. Sometimes it's a partner. Without witnesses, perception curdles into madness. With them, it becomes bearable. Why these few matter? The reality is brutal. The vast majority of people will never understand you if you perceive too much. But the few who do, whether through individuation, seeking, or witnessing, are enough. They remind you that you're not alone, that your perception isn't a curse invented by your mind, but a real phenomenon others can acknowledge. Jung believed these rare bonds were essential. They keep the seer human, connected, tethered enough to survive the loneliness of their vision. In the end, survival isn't just about inner work. It's also about finding and holding on to the few who can truly see you. And that brings us to the final chapter, the ultimate question Jung left us with. Will this rare gift destroy you or transform you? Chapter 9. Transformation or destruction. Jung's most dangerous discovery wasn't just an observation. It was a warning and an invitation. Because when you see everything, you're standing at a crossroads. One path leads to burnout, exile, and collapse. The other leads to transformation, wisdom, and a life of rare authenticity. The path of destruction. For many, the weight of perception is too much. They absorb everyone else's emotions until they can't feel their own. They reflect shadows back to people who lash out in rage. They isolate because it feels safer than pretending. And slowly, they dissolve. Their identity fragments. Their clarity becomes a prison instead of a gift. This is the danger Jung never stopped warning about: the annihilation of the individual under the weight of too much unconscious content. The path of transformation. But there is another way. If the seer learns to discriminate between what belongs to them and what belongs to others, if they integrate their own shadow before pointing to the shadows of the world, if they build containers strong enough to hold the unconscious without drowning in it, then their perception becomes something else. It becomes wisdom. They stop being a victim of what they see, and instead, they become a guide, a bridge, a living reminder that the unconscious doesn't have to stay unconscious. This is the individuation process at its highest form, not retreating from the world, not collapsing into it, but engaging with it consciously, with clarity and strength. The gift, hidden in the curse, Jung himself barely survived his confrontation with the unconscious, but he did survive, and out of it, he gave us some of the most powerful insights in modern psychology. Nietzsche collapsed under the weight of his vision. Meister Eckhart transmuted his into mystical wisdom. Jung saw in these examples the two possibilities of superior perception. It can kill you, or it can make you something extraordinary. The difference isn't in what you see. The difference is in how you integrate it. The final question. So the question is no longer, do you see what others miss? The question is, what will you do with that vision? Will it isolate you, break you, leave you haunted and alone? Or will you take the harder path, the path of integration, humility, and transformation, and become the kind of person Jung believed the world desperately needs? Because if you can carry this gift consciously, without letting it consume you, then you don't just survive perception. You embody it. You wield it. You become the mirror the world cannot ignore. And maybe, just maybe, the mirror it needs.